Let's start right here with recognition. If we're going to talk about setting boundaries with a narcissist, we have to begin with learning to see things clearly without flinching. And that's hard. It's especially hard when we've been close to someone, whether it's a parent, a partner, a boss, or even a friend. And we've been wrapped up in the belief that if we just loved harder, tried harder, were a little more forgiving, a little more patient, then maybe things would get better. But here's the truth. You can't set boundaries with someone you don't fully see. Recognizing narcissistic behavior isn't about diagnosing people. It's about protecting yourself. It's about having the courage to look at the patterns in a relationship, no matter how painful it is, to admit what you've been tolerating. Because narcissists don't walk around with a sign that says, hey, I will slowly erode your self-esteem while demanding your loyalty. No, it's subtle. It's charming at first. It's intoxicating in the beginning. They might mirror your deepest values, validate your insecurities in a way that feels like acceptance, and flood you with attention and praise. That kind of validation is powerful. It makes you feel seen. And if you've been starving for it, if you grew up in a place where love was conditional or unpredictable, then that initial high can feel like oxygen after holding your breath for too long. But it's not real connection. It's a transaction. Because underneath that charm, there's a deep void, an unfillable hunger for control, admiration, and dominance. And when you stop feeding it, when you assert your needs, when you ask for empathy or reciprocity, that's when the mask begins to slip. So how do we recognize what's happening before we're knee-deep in shame and self-doubt? It starts with paying attention to the moments that make you feel small, confused, or crazy. That sinking feeling in your gut when you're told that your feelings are too much or overreacting. When you walk away from a conversation thinking, was that my fault? Did I make that up? Why do I feel worse after trying to explain myself? That's not you being sensitive. That's your intuition trying to cut through the noise. Narcissistic behavior often shows up through gaslighting, twisting facts to make you question your own reality. You may bring up something that hurt you, and suddenly you're defending your tone, your memory, or your very right to be upset. You end up arguing about how you said it instead of what happened. Over time, this chips away at your self-trust. You stop speaking up, not because you don't care, but because you've learned it's not safe to be honest. I mean, here's where it gets even trickier. Narcissists don't act the same with everyone. They often save their worst behavior for behind closed doors. To the outside world, they might seem charming, generous, even selfless. And that can make you doubt yourself even more, because if everyone else thinks they're great, then maybe it really is me. That's how the shame loop starts. And once you're in it, it's hard to get out. So let me be really clear. Your feelings are valid. Your confusion is a clue, not a character flaw. The fact that you're questioning whether something is wrong is often the biggest indicator that something is wrong. You are not crazy. You are not too sensitive. You are not asking for too much. And once you start seeing the patterns, you can't unsee them. You'll notice the way narcissists hijack every conversation and make it about them. You'll see how apologies are rarely sincere. They're just ways to end the conversation or shift blame back to you. You'll feel how everything is conditional: love, approval, kindness. You'll realize how every boundary you try to set is met with either rage, passive aggression, or guilt tripping. And when you start to see this clearly, it's like coming out of a fog. At first, it's disorienting. You might feel grief because now you understand that the connection you thought you had was built on manipulation, not mutual respect. You might feel anger at them, at yourself, at all the time and energy you gave. And you might feel fear because now the question becomes, what do I do with this truth? Let me say this: recognition is painful, but it is the first act of freedom. Because once you see a pattern for what it is, you get to stop personalizing it. You stop internalizing the guilt and shame. You start creating distance, not just physically, but emotionally. You stop waiting for them to validate your experience. You start trusting your gut again, and that is where your power lives. You get to name the behavior. You get to say, when you constantly interrupt me, and shift the conversation back to yourself, it makes me feel, you get to say, I don't feel heard when I express a concern and it turns into an argument about how I brought it up. You get to say, I am allowed to have needs without being made to feel selfish. Naming it doesn't always change them. In fact, it rarely does. But it changes you. It changes the way you engage. It helps you prepare emotionally for the pushback, the minimization, the manipulations that might come when you start setting limits. Recognition gives you a strategy. It gives you language. And most importantly, it gives you a choice. Because without recognition, you're stuck in the cycle. You're stuck hoping that if you just explain things differently or stay calm enough or prove your loyalty one more time, things will shift. But when you recognize narcissistic behavior for what it is, you stop trying to win a game. You start conserving your energy. You begin shifting the focus inward, asking, what am I tolerating that is costing me my peace? Where am I abandoning myself just to keep the connection? What would it look like to stop managing their emotions and start honoring mine? That kind of clarity is not cold, it's compassionate. It's the opposite of judgment. Because when we see clearly, we stop making excuses for behavior that harms us. We stop confusing love with obligation. We stop romanticizing someone's potential while ignoring their impact. Recognizing narcissistic patterns doesn't mean you stop loving someone. It means you start loving yourself enough to say, this dynamic isn't healthy and I deserve better. Now, and I want to be honest, it doesn't always feel good. Sometimes setting that boundary or even just recognizing that one needs to be set brings a tidal wave of grief, because you realize that what you hoped the relationship could be, maybe it never really was, or maybe it was, but only when you were quiet, compliant, and self-sacrificing. And that's not love, that's control masquerading as connection. So let's hold space for all of it, for the anger, the sadness, the confusion, the clarity. Let's allow ourselves to feel it all. Because when you recognize what you're dealing with, you begin to reclaim your voice. And with that voice, you start to draw the kind of boundaries that say, I am not here to be controlled, manipulated, or erased. I am here to be seen, heard, and respected. And that right there is the beginning of everything. Let's sit with something that can be incredibly uncomfortable, but deeply freeing once we let it sink in. You can't change them. I know how hard it is to accept that. If you've been in a relationship with a narcissist, whether it's a parent, a partner, a boss, or even a sibling, you've probably spent a lot of time, maybe years, trying to decode them. You're trying to figure out what makes them tick, how to say things the right way so they won't lash out, how to adjust yourself, your tone, your timing, your truth, just to keep the peace. You've probably walked on eggshells. You've probably swallowed your needs more times than you can count. And underneath all of that is this very human, very vulnerable hope that if you just say it right, if you just love hard enough, if you're just patient enough, maybe they'll finally see you. Maybe they'll finally change. And when someone refuses to take responsibility for their behavior, you can't have real growth. You can't have mutual repair. You can't have safe intimacy. What you have instead is a loop where you're constantly the one bending, contorting, explaining, apologizing, even when you're the one who's been hurt. This is why accepting that you can't change them is so critical, because as long as you believe you can, you're investing your emotional energy in the wrong direction. And you're putting your time, your heart, your identity into trying to fix a dynamic that can only be changed if both people are willing to do the work. And if you're dealing with a narcissist, that willingness is usually not there. I know what some of you are probably thinking, but they have moments of vulnerability. I've seen them cry. I've heard them say they want to be better. Sometimes they even apologize. Yes, and I'm not denying that those moments happen. What I'm asking is, do those moments lead to real change? Or are they part of a cycle? Are they followed by meaningful action, or are they used to reset the dynamic so things can go back to the way they were? Because there's a difference between a moment of remorse and a pattern of repair. The first can be very convincing, even seductive, But the second requires consistency, humility, and a willingness to be uncomfortable. And narcissists typically avoid discomfort at all costs, especially if it means facing their own flaws. So if you've been holding out hope that one day they'll wake up and realize how deeply they've hurt you, and that from that point forward, things will be different, I want to gently invite you to set that down, not because your hope is foolish, but because it's costing you too much. Hope without boundaries turns into self-abandonment. And no relationship, no matter how meaningful it once felt, is worth sacrificing your sense of self. Here's what I've learned, and I say this with my whole heart. The moment you stop trying to change them is the moment you begin to reclaim your power. Because now, instead of waiting for them to get it, you get to focus on what you need. You get to ask, what's within my control? What can I do to make myself feel safe, clear, and grounded, regardless of what they choose to do? That's not giving up. That's stepping into truth. That's shifting from exhaustion to clarity. When we believe we can change someone, especially someone who repeatedly hurts us, we take on a job that isn't ours. We become hypervigilant, trying to anticipate their reactions. We over-explain ourselves. We tolerate disrespect in the name of compassion. And we do all of this while slowly losing touch with our own needs, our own worth, our own voice. But when we let go of the fantasy that our love can save them, or our patience can fix them, or our sacrifice will eventually earn us kindness, we make space for something much more honest. We begin to make decisions based not on who we wish they were, but on who they're actually showing us they are. And that shift, that's where boundaries start to take root. Because boundaries aren't about changing someone else's behavior. They're about being clear on what we will and won't allow, regardless of whether the other person agrees or approves. Boundaries say, I get to choose how I show up. I get to choose what I participate in. I get to choose how I respond when I'm being mistreated. And that's what makes them so powerful. But here's the thing, when you stop trying to change them, you're going to feel a gap. There's going to be this wide open space where all your energy used to go. And that space might feel like sadness or anger or regret. You might grieve all the time you spent trying to be what they needed, hoping that if you could just be better. Let yourself feel all of that. Don't rush it. Don't shame yourself for caring. You did the best you could with what you knew. You loved in the ways you were taught. You gave your energy from a place of deep sincerity. That's not weakness, that's integrity. But now you know better. Now you're waking up to the reality that your healing doesn't require their cooperation. You don't need them to say you were right in order to trust your own reality. You don't need their validation to know that you were hurt. You don't need them to meet you halfway in order to begin stepping back from the chaos. And here's what's really beautiful. Once you stop trying to change them, you start changing your own patterns. You start noticing the ways you've been trained to overfunction in relationships. You become more aware of the emotional labor you've been doing just to keep things steady. You start asking better questions. What do I need in this moment? What would it look like to honor my peace over their approval? What parts of me have I been silencing just to avoid their anger or disapproval? And then slowly you start practicing something new. You start responding differently. You speak up sooner. You say no without over-explaining. You stop engaging in circular conversations that go nowhere. You stop chasing closure from people who aren't capable of giving it. You may still feel sadness. You may still have days where you doubt yourself, but you'll also start to feel something else, relief, because you're no longer trapped in a role that was never yours to play. You're no longer trying to earn love through endurance. That's what happens when you stop trying to change them. You change the only thing you can, your relationship to yourself. You become less reactive and more discerning. And you stop making excuses for emotional abuse, even if it's subtle or familiar. You start seeing clearly the cost of staying in a dynamic where you're not allowed to be fully human, where your needs are dismissed, your feelings minimized, your voice silenced. And listen, this isn't about being cold. It's not about cutting people off just because they're flawed. We're all flawed. We all have work to do. But there's a difference between imperfection and harm. There's a difference between someone who messes up and takes accountability and someone who manipulates, deflects, and gaslights you every time you try to speak your truth. You're not here to be someone's emotional punching bag. You're not here to shrink yourself in order to maintain a connection. You're not here to play therapist, caretaker, or peacekeeper in a relationship that refuses to evolve. You're really here to be whole, to be real, to be grounded in your own worth. So let's stop carrying the burden of someone else's growth. Let's stop pouring our energy into trying to rescue someone who doesn't want to be rescued. Let's stop waiting for someone to change before we give ourselves permission to protect our peace. You don't need their transformation in order to start your healing. You don't need their permission to set boundaries. You don't need them to change in order to reclaim your voice. You just need to decide that your well-being matters more than staying in a dynamic that slowly destroys it. And that right there is your turning point. If we're going to talk about boundaries, and especially boundaries with someone who is deeply skilled in manipulation, blame shifting, or emotional control, then we have to start by turning inward. Before you say a word to anyone else, before you draw any lines in the sand, before you even decide what consequence might follow a crossed line, you need to get really clear with yourself about what your boundaries are. That might sound obvious, but I can't tell you how many of us go into challenging relationships without ever pausing to ask the most important question: what do I need to feel emotionally safe and respected? That question right there is the foundation of every boundary you'll ever set. When we've spent a long time in a relationship with a narcissist, or even just in a pattern with someone who chronically invalidates us, we start to lose touch with our own internal compass. We second guess ourselves constantly. We don't trust our gut anymore because every time we voice something uncomfortable, every time we said this feels off or that hurt, we were met with defensiveness, rage, or mockery. So we learn, often without realizing it, to abandon our feelings in order to preserve the peace. But what happens when we do that long enough is this: we stop knowing where our boundaries are altogether. We confuse silence with strength. We confuse tolerance with love. We confuse shrinking ourselves with being easy to get along with. And that's not the life we came here to live. Getting clear on your boundaries means tuning back in. It means rebuilding your connection with that quiet, steady voice inside you, the one that knows when something doesn't feel right, even if everyone else is telling you it's fine. It means paying attention to how your body reacts when someone crosses a line. Your body knows. Your chest tightens, your stomach flips, or your jaw clenches. That's not drama. That's data. That's your nervous system trying to tell you something's wrong. The clarity begins with honesty. Not performative honesty, the kind where you rehearse what you'll say in your head over and over before you say it out loud. I'm talking about raw honesty, where you let yourself admit things you've been avoiding, even if they feel inconvenient, even if they bring up guilt, even if they force you to confront what you've been tolerating. And here's the part that's hard. You might discover that your real boundaries don't match the life you've built around you. You might realize that what you actually need from this person, consistency, respect, emotional safety, is something they've never been willing to give. You might realize that the version of you that this relationship allows isn't the version of you that feels most alive, most true. And that's painful, but it's also liberating, because once you know what you need, you stop settling for what you've been given. Sometimes we avoid defining our boundaries because we know deep down that honoring them might cost us something. It might cost us the illusion of peace. It might cost us the approval we've been chasing. It might cost us a relationship we've spent years trying to hold together. But the alternative, living in quiet resentment, confusion, and self-betrayal, is far more expensive in the long run. So let me ask you this. Where in your life are you pretending to be okay with something that's actually breaking your heart? Where are you saying it's fine when your body is screaming that it's not? Where have you convinced yourself that being low mental means accepting treatment that leaves you feeling small, exhausted, or invisible? Getting clear on your boundaries isn't about making a list of demands. It's not about controlling someone else's behavior. It's about knowing what you will and will not participate in. It's about drawing a circle around your emotional well-being and saying, this is mine to protect. That might sound simple, but it takes deep courage, especially if you've been conditioned to think that having needs makes you needy or that saying no makes you selfish. Those messages run deep. Maybe you learned them in childhood. Maybe you learned them in a relationship where your feelings were routinely dismissed or minimized. Maybe you've internalized the idea that it's your job to be the stable one, the forgiving one, the one who absorbs the damage so no one else has to. But here's the truth. Boundaries aren't walls, they're bridges to real connection. Because when you're clear with yourself about what you need, you show up more honestly. You stop pretending, you stop performing, and you give the people around you the opportunity to relate to the real you, not the edited version, not the agreeable version, but the you that's grounded in integrity. That's a gift not just to you, but to everyone you love. But when you're dealing with someone who leans narcissistic, someone who thrives on pushing past limits and making everything about them, you can't skip this step. Because if you don't know your boundaries, they'll define them for you. They'll tell you what's normal, what's too sensitive, what you should be over by now. And if you're not anchored in your own clarity, you'll start believing them. You'll start doubting yourself. You'll stay in conversations that go in circles. You'll apologize for having feelings. You'll explain yourself to someone who has no intention of listening. That's not peace. That's submission. That's giving away your power and calling it love. So what does it actually look like to get clear on your boundaries? It looks like noticing what behaviors leave you feeling drained, confused, or unsafe. It looks like writing those things down, not to make a case against the other person, but to make a commitment to yourself. It looks like identifying your non-negotiables. I will not tolerate being yelled at. I need my time and space to be respected. And where you're single, I will not engage in conversations where my reality is dismissed. It looks like practicing these boundaries in your own mind before you ever say them out loud, because part of this work is believing you have the right to protect your peace. Clarity also means getting specific. A vague boundary like, I want to be treated better, doesn't help you in the moment when someone crosses the line. But a clear one, like, if you start yelling, that will leave the conversation, gives you something concrete to return to. It removes the ambiguity that narcissists love to exploit. Let's be honest, clarity doesn't mean the other person will like your boundaries. In fact, if you've never set them before, or if your relationship has operated for a long time without them, they probably won't. You might get pushback. You might be called selfish. You might be guilt-tripped or emotionally baited. And that's not a sign you're doing it wrong. That's a sign you're disrupting a dynamic that was never built to respect your boundaries in the first place. But if you're clear within yourself, that resistance doesn't knock you off center. You don't have to justify or defend what you need. You just hold your boundary with calm, grounded certainty. Not because you want to punish anyone, but because you've decided to stop punishing yourself. This work is sacred. It's hard. It will require you to sit with discomfort. It might mean disappointing people who are used to you saying yes all the time. It might mean walking away from situations where your boundaries are not honored. But it will also mean finding your way back to yourself. Because here's the thing. Every time you honor your clarity, you send a message to yourself that says, I matter. And every time you define what's okay and what's not okay, you affirm your worth. You stop waiting for someone else to draw the line. You stop outsourcing your peace to people who only give you love when it's convenient for them. Getting clear on your boundaries isn't just about protecting yourself from harm. It's about creating the conditions for genuine connection. It's about being able to look yourself in the mirror and know that you are living in alignment with what you value most. It's about knowing that you are no longer betraying yourself in the name of keeping someone else comfortable. That kind of clarity doesn't come overnight. It comes with practice. It comes with letting yourself be seen by you first. It comes with saying, this is what I need, and I'm willing to protect it, even if it makes someone else uncomfortable. And that's not cruelty. That's courage. One of the hardest lessons we ever learn in emotionally complex relationships is this: silence can be powerful. Silence doesn't always mean withdrawal, coldness, or punishment. In fact, when you're dealing with a narcissist, silence can be one of the most courageous and self-protective choices you ever make. Not the kind of silence that erases your voice, not the kind that comes from fear or suppression, but the kind that's rooted in strength, the kind that says, I will not engage with dysfunction just to keep the peace. And that can feel deeply counterintuitive, especially for those of us who have been conditioned to explain ourselves, to smooth things over, to fill every uncomfortable gap in the conversation. If you've spent years walking on eggshells, you may have learned that staying safe means staying agreeable, that keeping the peace means keeping the conversation going, even when it's going nowhere. You may have developed a reflex to respond, to justify, to clarify, especially when someone is twisting your words, baiting you, or questioning your motives. But here's what I want you to hear. Not every comment deserves a response. Not every accusation requires your defense. Not every argument needs your participation. That's not weakness. That's discernment. That's maturity, that's self-respect, because when you engage with someone who thrives on emotional chaos, you feed the dynamic they depend on. You give them the stage. You hand them the script. You enter into a performance where your words are manipulated, your tone is dissected, and your truth is twisted into something it was never meant to be. And you walk away from those interactions not only exhausted, but questioning your own reality. Silence breaks that cycle. Now, let's be clear. Silence doesn't mean passive resignation. It doesn't mean giving up on your truth or becoming invisible. It means knowing when engagement is futile. It means recognizing when continuing the conversation only deepens the dysfunction. It means choosing your peace over proving your point. And here's the tricky part. If you're someone who values connection, who believes in repair, who has been taught that healthy relationships require open communication, silence can feel like a betrayal of your values. You may worry that you're being cold, that you're giving up, that you're letting them win. But when you're dealing with someone who isn't interested in mutual understanding, someone who turns every conversation into a courtroom, someone who hears your vulnerability as a weakness to exploit, then silence isn't surrender, it's strategy, it's self-protection, it's a boundary. Because there's a big difference between a conversation and a power play. One is based in curiosity and respect. The other is built on dominance, distortion, and control. When a narcissist pulls you into their script, their goal isn't connection. It's control. It's to make you doubt yourself, to derail your point, to provoke you into saying something they can later use against you. And the more you try to clarify, the more you play defense, the more energy you give them to continue the game, silence takes the oxygen out of that fire. It says, I will not perform. I will not defend myself against distortions. I will not stay in a conversation that violates my integrity. It communicates a level of self-trust that says, I don't need you to understand me in order to know my truth. And that is incredibly powerful, especially when you've spent most of your life believing that love means making yourself endlessly available for emotional labor. Silence is also powerful because it gives you space to think. When you stop reacting immediately, when you pause before responding, you create room to listen to yourself. You allow your nervous system to calm. You make space to ask, what's really happening here? What does this interaction cost me? Do I feel more clear or more confused after engaging? And often what you'll find is that these conversations don't move you closer to connection. They move you deeper into confusion. That's because narcissistic communication isn't designed to create clarity. It's designed to destabilize you. It's not about hearing you. It's about wearing you down. So when you refuse to respond, when you let the baited comments hang in the air untouched, you send a signal, not necessarily to them, but to yourself. You say, I trust my boundaries enough not to explain them. I trust my voice enough not to defend it. I trust my worth enough not to argue for it. That kind of silence, that's not quiet. That's thunderous. Now, I'm not saying this is easy. In fact, it might be one of the most uncomfortable things you'll ever do. You'll feel the urge to jump in, to correct the narrative, to plead your case, especially if they start telling lies about you, especially if they accuse you of being cold, dramatic, ungrateful. And let me tell you, those moments will test you. You'll want to scream, that's not what happened. You'll want to write the paragraph, send the voice note, make the phone call, because it hurts. Being misrepresented hurts. But you have to ask yourself, what is the cost of engaging? What do you lose every time you enter a conversation where the other person has no interest in hearing you? Because every time you abandon your peace to prove your point, you teach yourself that your value is negotiable, that your truth is only valid if it's accepted by someone else, and that's not the message you want to live by. Sometimes silence is the most loving choice you can make for yourself. It's not about punishing the other person. It's not about withholding or being vindictive. It's about choosing your well-being over the compulsion to be understood by someone who is committed to misunderstanding you. Silence also helps reveal what's real. When you stop explaining, stop justifying, stop engaging, the other person's patterns become more visible. Their need for control becomes clearer. Their inability to sit with your silence becomes revealing, because someone who's emotionally grounded doesn't panic when you take space. They don't guilt trip you for not responding on their timeline. They don't escalate just because you didn't immediately fold, but someone who thrives on dominance will see your silence as a threat, and they'll often try harder to pull you back in. They might love bomb you. They might escalate the drama. They might suddenly play the victim. All of that is meant to provoke a reaction. And that's the key. Reaction is what they're after. When you respond impulsively, emotionally, defensively, they feel powerful. But when you stay grounded, when you let the silence speak for you, they lose their grip. Silence doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care enough about yourself to stop pouring energy into a black hole. It means you understand that not every fight is worth having. It means you've realized that peace isn't found in winning an argument. It's found in choosing not to have the argument at all. And here's what often happens. The first few times you choose silence, you'll feel disoriented, maybe even guilty. That's normal. You're disrupting a pattern that's been in place for a long time. But eventually, the space created by your silence will fill with something new: clarity, strength, self-trust. You'll begin to realize that you don't need to be reactive to be strong, that you don't need to be loud to be heard, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. And that's where your voice gets sharper, not louder, sharper, more aligned, more discerning. You stop trying to be heard in rooms that never valued your truth in the first place. You stop bleeding out in conversations that go nowhere. You stop throwing yourself into battles that were never meant to be won, just repeated. And instead, you start investing your energy in people who honor your silence, who meet it with respect, not manipulation, who hold space for your boundaries, even when they don't like them. Because that's the thing, your silence will repel those who only loved your compliance, and it will attract those who respect your capacity to choose peace. That's not just a communication strategy. That's a way of reclaiming your life, So the next time you feel pulled into a toxic dynamic, ask yourself, what would it look like if I just didn't respond, if I let their words fall flat, untouched, instead of catching them and throwing them back? What would happen if I prioritized my peace over their provocation? And then breathe. Ground yourself. Remember that silence isn't absence, it's presence. It's you choosing with intention not to abandon yourself just to be heard by someone who isn't listening. You don't owe everyone an answer. You don't owe everyone access to your emotional energy. And you certainly don't owe anyone your participation in their dysfunction. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is say absolutely nothing. When we talk about setting boundaries with someone who consistently manipulates, deflects, or denies responsibility, someone whose behavior is rooted in narcissism, we have to talk about consistency, not just occasional firmness, not just moments of clarity in the middle of conflict. I mean, day in, day out, even when it's hard, consistency. Because the truth is, boundaries that aren't upheld consistently aren't really boundaries. They're suggestions, and narcissists don't honor suggestions. Now, if you're someone who's been in a relationship like this for a while, I want to acknowledge something right off the bat. This isn't easy. This isn't about finding the right words or learning the perfect tone. This is about aligning your actions with your values again and again, even when the other person pushes back, even when they guilt trip you, even when they do that thing where they suddenly act like the person you hope they could be, just long enough to make you question everything. Consistency is hard because it costs you comfort. It costs you the illusion of harmony. It might even cost you the version of the relationship you've clung to. But inconsistency, wobbling, bending your rules, making exceptions to keep the peace, cost you you. It cost you your peace. It chips away at your self-trust until you start to wonder if maybe you're the one who's being unreasonable. And let's get real about what happens when you try to set a boundary with someone who doesn't respect boundaries. At first, they might test you, push the limits, pretend they didn't hear what you said, twist your words. They may even go out of their way to act like they're complying, only to later shift the goalposts. This is where so many people give up, not because they're weak, but because they're exhausted. They think, I tried, I said what I needed, it didn't work. But that's the moment when your consistency matters most. That's when you're no longer setting a boundary for them. You're setting one for you. You're saying to yourself, even when they act like the rules don't apply, I will honor what I said. I will follow through. I will not be moved off center just because they don't like my center. It's incredibly tempting to want to be flexible with our boundaries, especially when we care about someone, when they come back with apologies or tears or sudden vulnerability, when they say they didn't mean it or that they're trying or that you're being too harsh. That's when the doubt creeps in. That's when your empathy starts negotiating with your clarity. But here's what I want you to remember. Your boundary is not a punishment. It's not a power play. It's a reflection of your values, your limits, your emotional well-being. It doesn't have to bend just because someone is temporarily being nice. Narcissists often rely on that cycle. Idealize, devalue, discard, repeat. They know that kindness can be used as a tool. They know that if they give you just enough softness, just enough warmth, just enough hope, you'll start to loosen the lines you drew. That's why consistency is everything. It's not about being rigid or cold. It's about being rooted. It's about being so deeply grounded in your truth that you don't get swept away by charm, manipulation, or crisis. Because believe me, when a narcissist realizes their old tactics aren't working anymore, they might escalate, they might create chaos, they might try to provoke you, make you the problem, flip the narrative. And if you haven't committed to consistency, that's when you'll start to doubt yourself. You'll start to wonder if maybe you're being too harsh. You'll start to think, well, maybe just this once. But every time you violate your own boundary, you send yourself a message. You say, my limits are negotiable. And the person on the other side of that boundary gets that message loud and clear. That's why the real power isn't just in setting the boundary, it's in holding it. every time, especially when it's uncomfortable, especially when it would be easier to let it slide. Let me tell you something. Consistency is not always loud. Sometimes it's as quiet as walking away from a conversation that turns manipulative without defending yourself. Sometimes it's as calm as saying, this is the boundary I already explained, and refusing to rehash it. Sometimes it's just sticking to your plan, your time frame, your space, even when someone is trying to make you feel guilty for it. And yes, they may accuse you of being controlling or cold or distant. They may say, you've changed. And you know what? They're right. You have changed. You've changed from someone who felt responsible for other people's feelings into someone who is responsible for their own well-being. That's growth. That's healing. That's self-respect in action. You are allowed to have a boundary and still be compassionate. You are allowed to be kind and firm at the same time. You are allowed to care deeply and still say, this behavior is not acceptable in my life. Consistency doesn't mean you stop feeling empathy. It just means your empathy doesn't override your integrity. And for those of you wondering, what if my boundary is too harsh? What if I'm overreacting? Ask yourself this. Are you feeling empowered by this boundary, or are you using it to control someone else? Are you making a choice from fear or from love? For yourself, most of the time, the boundary that feels too much is actually the one you needed a long time ago. We're not taught how to be consistent. We're taught how to accommodate. We're praised for being flexible, easygoing, forgiving, but consistency is what gives your boundaries backbone. It's what teaches people how to treat you, not through your words, but through your actions over time. This is especially important when dealing with a narcissist because they are watching, they are calculating, they are noting exactly how far they can push before you start to bend. And if you let the boundary slide even once, they will interpret that as permission, as a loophole, as evidence that your no isn't really a no, it's a maybe. You teach people how to treat you by what you tolerate, not what you say. That's why you have to decide early and clearly what the consequence is when a boundary is crossed, and then follow through every single time, not out of spite, not to hurt them, but to protect your own sense of safety and self-trust. You don't need to over-explain. You don't need to justify. You simply need to follow through. And let's talk about that follow through for a minute, because it's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's not cutting someone off or ending the relationship, although sometimes that is necessary. Often it's smaller steps, leaving the room, ending the call, not responding to the texts, saying, I'm not going to continue this conversation when you're yelling, and then actually stepping away. It's not the intensity of the consequence that matters, it's the consistency. When they know that a cross boundary will always lead to the same response from you, they stop testing it as often, or at least you become clearer about what kind of relationship is possible. Some people can grow, some won't, but either way, you're no longer in the business of trying to manage their growth. You're in the business of managing your peace. That's shift, that's freedom. It's not always flashy. It's not always satisfying in the moment. But over time, that kind of consistency rebuilds your nervous system. It restores your dignity. It allows you to live in alignment with your values, not just in your quiet moments, but in the heat of conflict. And don't get me wrong, there will be setbacks. You'll wobble. You'll want to make an exception. You'll miss the old dynamic, even if it wasn't healthy. That's okay. You're human. The point isn't perfection, it's commitment. Every time you choose consistency, you're reparenting the part of you that once had to tolerate the intolerable just to feel safe. So let your no be steady. Let your follow through be unwavering. Let your peace be your measure of success, not their approval. Because here's what I've learned over and over again. When your boundaries are consistent, your life becomes more peaceful. Not because the world stops being chaotic, but because you stop participating in the chaos. When you're in a relationship with someone who has narcissistic tendencies, one of the hardest things to navigate is how to stay emotionally grounded. How do you maintain your sense of self when the other person is constantly pushing, manipulating, or deflecting? How do you stay in touch with your emotions and needs when you feel like you're constantly walking through a fog of confusion, guilt, and doubt? The answer is this: you must learn to tune out the noise. You must learn to distinguish between your inner truth and the distortion that comes from someone who is trying to make you question yourself. You see, when you're dealing with a narcissist, they often try to hijack your sense of reality. They twist your words, they deny your feelings, they make you feel like your needs are unreasonable or that your emotions are too much. Over time, if you're not careful, this can erode your confidence in your own perceptions. It can cause you to lose touch with your instincts, to second guess yourself at every turn. This is why learning how to trust yourself, how to stay grounded in your own emotional truth becomes absolutely essential when you're setting boundaries with someone like this. One of the first steps in learning to trust your emotions again is acknowledging that your feelings are valid. I know that might sound simple, but when you've been told over and over again that your feelings are wrong, that you're overreacting, or that you're being too sensitive, it becomes a radical act of self-love to reclaim your emotions and accept them as legitimate. Your anger, your hurt, your disappointment, they are not only valid, they are signals that something is off. They are the warning lights on the dashboard of your emotional life, telling you that a boundary has been crossed or that a pattern is repeating itself. So often we try to dismiss these feelings, especially when we're dealing with a narcissist, because they will do everything in their power to minimize our emotions. Oh, you're too emotional, they might say, or why are you always so dramatic? This is their tactic to shift the focus away from their behavior and make you feel like you're the one at fault. It's gaslighting in its purest form. And it's a manipulative strategy designed to make you doubt your perception of reality. But here's the truth. Your feelings are your compass. They are the barometer of what's healthy and what's not. Your gut instinct, that inner knowing, is something that's been honed over a lifetime of experiences. You don't need anyone else to tell you that your emotions are justified. And you certainly don't need anyone else to dictate how you should feel. You have the right to be angry when you've been hurt, sad when you've been disappointed, frustrated when you've been manipulated. What narcissists do is they turn the tables on you. They make you feel like you're the one causing the problem. They create a dynamic where your emotional responses are made to seem like the issue instead of addressing the behavior that caused them. And the longer you let that happen, the more disconnected you become from your own truth. That's why staying grounded in your feelings is so important. It's your way of saying, I will not let you rewrite my reality. The next step in staying grounded is to recognize that you do not owe anyone an explanation for your emotions. You don't owe a narcissist or anyone else a reason for why you feel what you feel. One of the biggest traps in these kinds of relationships is the constant pressure to justify yourself. You might find yourself saying things like, I feel hurt because when you said X, it made me feel Y. Or I need space because I've been overwhelmed by this situation. While it's important to communicate your needs, it's also important to understand that you don't need to explain yourself or provide a rationale for your emotions. You are allowed to feel how you feel, even if the other person doesn't understand or agree. Narcissists in particular thrive on the idea that they can control your emotional responses by getting you to justify your boundaries or needs. And the minute you start explaining or defending yourself, you give them an opening to manipulate the conversation, to make you feel like you're the one who's being unreasonable. So instead of getting caught in the cycle of explanation, learn to say, this is how I feel and this is what I need, period. No justification, no apology, no backpedaling. Your feelings don't need anyone's approval or validation. They simply are. And when you honor them, you reclaim your emotional autonomy. But even when you learn to trust your feelings and set clear boundaries, the narcissist will often try to push you off center. They might try to manipulate your emotions, guilt trip you, or even threaten to withdraw affection or attention in an attempt to regain control. These are all tactics designed to make you question your decisions and abandon your boundaries. This is when you need to practice what I call staying in your own lane. Staying in your own lane means staying focused on your emotional truth no matter what's going on around you. It's about not letting the other person's emotional chaos pull you off course. This is especially hard when the narcissist tries to evoke strong emotional reactions from you, whether it's anger, guilt, or fear. They will do whatever they can to get you out of your grounded space because that's how they regain the upper hand. One of the most powerful ways to stay in your lane is to recognize that you don't have to engage in every emotional tug of war. You don't have to pick up the emotional weight they're trying to put on you. You don't have to react to every provocation. In fact, the less you engage in their emotional manipulation, the less power they have over you. This doesn't mean you have to shut down your emotions or ignore them. It simply means that you don't allow their emotional storm to become yours. I know that can be difficult, especially when the narcissist uses tactics like stonewalling, silent treatment, or explosive outbursts to try to get you to react. But here's where the strength of staying grounded comes in. When you don't take the bait, when you don't get pulled into the chaos, you stay rooted in your own truth. You maintain control over your own emotional state. You choose peace over drama. And let me tell you, that kind of emotional sovereignty, choosing not to be at the mercy of someone else's emotional volatility, is one of the most empowering things you can do for yourself. It's not easy. It's not quick. But over time, it will make you more resilient, more self-confident, and more at peace with who you are, regardless of how the other person behaves and other. Another key element in staying grounded emotionally is knowing when to step away. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do in the face of emotional manipulation is simply remove yourself from the situation. Whether that means leaving the room, hanging up the phone, or taking a walk outside, getting space allows you to regain your emotional clarity, gives you the opportunity to reset, to come back to your center, and to assess what's happening without being caught up in the heat of the moment. This is especially important when you're dealing with a narcissist because they will try to create chaos. They'll try to escalate the situation to the point where you feel like you can't think straight. Taking a step back gives you the breathing room you need to stay true to yourself. It's a boundary in itself to protect your emotional space, to protect your sense of self. You see, staying grounded emotionally isn't about being unaffected by the narcissist's behavior. It's not about becoming numb to their tactics or pretending they don't bother you. It's about learning how to respond from a place of strength, not from reactivity. It's about trusting that you don't need to defend or explain yourself at every turn. And most importantly, it's about remembering that your emotions are valid, that your truth is valid, and that you are worthy of emotional peace. You are allowed to feel however you feel, and you are allowed to make decisions based on those feelings. You don't need anyone's permission or approval to honor your emotional truth. And when you stay emotionally grounded, when you trust yourself, when you refuse to get caught up in someone else's emotional manipulation, you become a force to be reckoned with. You reclaim your power, your peace, and your sense of self. In the end, the greatest act of self-care you can give yourself is to trust your own emotional landscape. The narcissist's goal is to confuse, control, and distort. Your goal is to stay clear, stay grounded, and stay true to yourself. That's how you set boundaries that last, and that's how you create the emotional space to thrive. You've got this. One of the most empowering things you can do when setting boundaries with a narcissist is to remember that you are not obligated to explain, defend, or justify your boundaries. It sounds simple, but this is a lesson many of us struggle with. When you've been gaslighted, manipulated, or made to feel like your needs are unreasonable, it's easy to fall into the trap of feeling like you have to defend every choice you make, every no you set. But the truth is, when you're dealing with a narcissist, explanations only give them more space to twist your words, guilt trip you, and manipulate the situation. I want to pause for a moment here because this is critical. You don't owe anyone an explanation for your boundaries, not for setting them, not for enforcing them, and certainly not for maintaining them. Your boundaries are yours, and they are not up for negotiation or debate, no matter how much the narcissist tries to convince you otherwise. What the narcissist wants is control. They want you to feel like you need their approval or understanding before you make any decisions about your own life, your own space, your own well-being. But when you fall into that trap, you are giving them a power they have no right to. Boundaries are often seen as something rigid or harsh. We've been conditioned to think that being firm or resolute about our needs is somehow unkind, selfish, or mean-spirited. But this couldn't be further from the truth. The truth is that setting and maintaining boundaries is a courageous act of self-respect. It's a way to honor your needs, your values, and your emotional well-being. And it is essential for your mental health, especially when you're dealing with someone who will continuously test, push, and disregard those boundaries. Think about it. How often do we allow people to cross our boundaries because we feel guilty or afraid? How many times have you said yes when you really meant no because you didn't want to disappoint someone, or you didn't want to face the consequences of standing up for yourself? We've all done it. And with a narcissist, that cycle of self-doubt and people-pleasing can be even more insidious. They know exactly how to exploit your vulnerability. They know how to make you feel like you are the problem when you assert yourself. But here's the hard truth. You can't keep explaining or justifying your boundaries to someone who doesn't respect them. When you do that, you're giving away your power. You're engaging in a conversation that doesn't need to happen. You're allowing someone else to make your choices for you. And every time you do that, you reinforce the idea that their comfort, their approval, or their opinion is more important than your well-being. That's not a healthy dynamic. That's a cycle of manipulation and control. The next time you find yourself in a situation where you feel like you need to explain yourself, ask yourself why. Why do I feel like I need their approval? Why do I feel like I need to justify my decision? Is it because I want peace? Or is it because I fear their reaction? Is it because I don't believe I'm worthy of standing firm? Or is it because I've been conditioned to believe that my needs don't matter? We also need to recognize that when you stop explaining your boundaries, you start demonstrating self-respect. You are saying without words, this is what I need. This is what I will and will not tolerate. I trust myself to know what's right for me, and I don't need anyone else to approve of it. And when you do that consistently, when you stay grounded in your own truth, you teach people how to respect you. You teach them that your boundaries are not negotiable and that you will not be swayed by guilt or manipulation. But let's talk about something that can make this even more challenging. What happens when the narcissist begins to escalate their tactics? Let's say you've started to set boundaries, you've started to hold firm, and suddenly they become more demanding. Maybe they threaten to withdraw love or affection. Maybe they accuse you of being selfish, cruel, or unloving. Maybe they escalate to blaming you for the breakdown in the relationship. This is their strategy, turning the tables to make you feel like the bad guy. In these moments, the urge to explain yourself is going to be even stronger. You'll feel compelled to justify your actions, to explain why you're setting the boundary, to make them see that you're not trying to hurt them. But let me tell you this. There is no explanation that will satisfy a narcissist. No amount of reasoning, no amount of apologies, no amount of negotiation will make them see your side. They are not interested in understanding your perspective. They are interested in maintaining control. So the more you try to explain, the more you feed into their need to dominate the conversation and distort your reality. When you stop explaining, you take away their ability to manipulate you. You deny them the power to twist your words and make you question your own decisions. You take away the energy they're used to feeding off of, and you protect yourself from falling into the trap of trying to earn their approval. The power of not explaining your boundaries is not just about refusing to justify yourself. It's about reclaiming your emotional sovereignty. It's about saying, I don't need your permission. I don't need your approval. I don't need your understanding. What I need is to honor myself, my needs, and my well-being. This is where the real strength comes in. Of course, this doesn't mean that you stop communicating altogether. Boundaries are not about shutting people out or becoming emotionally distant. They're about clarity and respect. It's about expressing your needs in a direct, assertive, but respectful way. You can say, I need some space right now, or I don't tolerate being spoken to that way, without giving a detailed explanation. You can set a boundary with love, kindness, and firmness without getting into a long discussion about why it's necessary. The more you practice this, the more natural it becomes. And I know it's hard. It feels uncomfortable at first, especially when you're used to explaining yourself or trying to make others feel comfortable. But as you practice this, you'll start to notice something profound. Your boundaries will become stronger. They will become more deeply rooted in your sense of self because they no longer depend on someone else's validation and time. You'll realize that the more you hold firm in your boundaries without explanation, the more you stop seeking external approval. You stop questioning whether you're being too much or asking for too much. You begin to trust yourself and your decisions. You begin to honor your own needs and desires without feeling guilty or apologetic. So the next time you're in a situation where a narcissist is trying to push your boundaries, trying to manipulate you into explaining or justifying your needs, I want you to remember this. You don't owe them an explanation. You don't owe anyone an explanation for why you need what you need or for why you're setting the boundaries that are necessary for your well-being. Your boundaries are a reflection of your self-respect, your values, and your commitment to protecting your peace. You don't need to explain your no. You don't need to justify your yes. All you need to do is trust that you have the right to make those decisions for yourself and to stand by them no matter what anyone else thinks. That is your power. That is your strength. And in that space where you stop explaining and start trusting, you'll find the freedom and peace that comes from truly owning your boundaries. One of the most profound lessons you'll learn while setting boundaries with a narcissist is that your boundaries are not just a reflection of what you are unwilling to tolerate. They are also a mirror of your own self-worth. What we sometimes forget is that when we allow others to violate our boundaries, we are sending a message to ourselves about what we believe we deserve. The truth is, we teach people how to treat us, and we also teach ourselves what we're willing to accept. When you're in a relationship with someone who has narcissistic tendencies, it's easy to lose sight of your own needs, to forget that your worth is not tied to how much you give, how much you sacrifice, or how much you bend to the will of someone else. The narcissist by nature will try to make everything about them. They want your attention, your energy, your time, often at the expense of your own well-being. And if we're not careful, if we don't set clear, healthy boundaries, we begin to forget that we are allowed to take up space, that our needs are just as important as anyone else's. It can feel like an act of defiance to push back against someone who is constantly demanding more, who manipulates, gaslights, and twists your words to make you feel guilty for asserting yourself. But the reality is, setting boundaries is not just about protecting yourself from the narcissist. It's about honoring the value of your own life, your own needs, and your own emotions. It's about saying, I am worthy of respect. I am worthy of peace. I am worthy of my own time and energy. We live in a world that often tells us to put others first, to be selfless, to put our own needs aside for the sake of family, work, or relationships. There's a prevailing narrative that in order to be loved or accepted, we must constantly give and give, sometimes to the point of exhaustion. And when you're dealing with a narcissist, this dynamic is amplified because they will constantly take, often without any regard for your well-being, your emotions, or your needs. Their love, affection, or approval is often conditional, and they expect you to prove your worthiness by how much you are willing to sacrifice. But what we often don't realize in these moments is that when we allow someone to overstep our boundaries, we are teaching ourselves that we are not worthy of respect, that our needs don't matter, and that our peace can be sacrificed for someone else's comfort. And when we fall into that pattern, we lose ourselves. We become so focused on what the narcissist wants, on what they need, on what will make them happy, that we forget what it means to take care of ourselves. We forget that we have the right to our own time, our own space, our own emotions, and our own peace. Setting boundaries, therefore, becomes an act of self-love. It is a way of saying, I deserve to have my needs respected. I deserve to have my time honored. I deserve to be treated with kindness and care. And when we begin to set those boundaries, even if it's hard at first, we start to reinforce to ourselves that we are worthy of love, respect, and dignity, not because we give endlessly to others, but because we honor ourselves. And this is why it's so important to recognize that boundaries are not just about protecting yourself from others. They are also about protecting your relationship with yourself. When we fail to set boundaries, we may be trying to maintain peace or avoid conflict, but what we're really doing is compromising our own sense of worth. We may be trying to avoid the narcissist's wrath or attempts at manipulation, but in the process, we are teaching ourselves that we don't deserve to be heard, that we don't deserve our own needs to be met. When you set a boundary and hold firm to it, you are saying, I matter, my needs matter, I am deserving of respect. This act, though it may feel uncomfortable or even selfish in the moment, is actually one of the most self-respecting things you can do. In fact, it's often the case that the more a narcissist pushes against your boundaries, the more you are reminded of why you need to stand firm. Because the more they push, the more they show you that they don't respect you, and the more you are reminded that you are the only one who can protect your peace. It's also important to recognize that setting boundaries with a narcissist is not about controlling them or trying to change them. It's about protecting yourself and creating space for your own well-being. This is a distinction that can be hard to make when you're emotionally invested in the relationship. You may think that if you just explain yourself well enough, if you just set the boundary in the right way, the narcissist will understand and change. But the truth is, they probably won't. Narcissists are rarely interested in understanding or changing their behavior. Their goal is control, and they will resist anything that challenges that control. So setting boundaries is not about changing the narcissist. It's about changing how you interact with them. It's about changing how much power you give them over your life, your time, your energy, and your emotional state. It's about reclaiming your autonomy, your space, and your peace. And in doing so, you reinforce to yourself that your value is not dependent on how much you give or how much you sacrifice, but on your intrinsic worth as a person. There's also something incredibly powerful about setting boundaries with a narcissist that you may not realize at first. You are teaching them how to treat you. The more consistently you hold firm to your boundaries, the more you train them to understand that you will not tolerate disrespect, manipulation, or control. And while it's true that narcissists may try to test, push, or ignore your boundaries, the fact that you continue to stand firm is a message in and of itself. It's a message that says, I will no longer tolerate being treated as less than. I will no longer allow you to dictate how I feel or how I spend my time. Of course, this process is not always easy. Narcissists often react to boundaries with anger, frustration, or even worse, with attempts to guilt trip or manipulate you into backing down. They may accuse you of being selfish, unreasonable, or uncaring. But what's really happening in those moments is that they are attempting to maintain control, and your job is to remind yourself that you are not obligated to explain, defend, or justify your boundary. They are yours to set, and they are yours to protect. In fact, the more you assert your boundaries, the more you will begin to see your own self-worth reflected back to you. And over time, this will shift your mindset. You'll stop seeing boundaries as a defensive mechanism or an act of confrontation, and you'll start seeing them as an expression of your inherent value. When you stop compromising your boundaries for the sake of others, you stop compromising your sense of self, and you begin to see that your needs matter, your feelings matter, and you are worthy of love and respect just as much as anyone else. And the more you honor your boundaries, the more you'll realize that you are worthy of a relationship where mutual respect and care are at the core. You'll begin to see that you don't need to sacrifice yourself to be loved. that you don't need to constantly give in to maintain peace, and that your needs and desires are just as important as anyone else's. And if someone is unable or unwilling to respect those needs, then that's not a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of their inability to value you. Setting boundaries with a narcissist is not an easy path. It's full of challenges, emotional hurdles, and difficult conversations, but it is also an incredibly empowering journey. It's a journey where you rediscover your own value, your own worth, and your own right to peace. It's a journey where you learn to trust that your needs are valid, that your emotions are valid, and that you are worthy of respect, no matter who is standing in front of you. As you move forward, remember this: your boundaries are a reflection of who you are and what you value. When you set them, you are telling yourself and the world that you deserve to be treated with kindness, respect, and dignity. You are worthy of love and care, not because you give endlessly to others, but because you honor your own needs and your own well-being. And in that space, you will find the peace, the freedom, and the self-respect that you deserve. You deserve that peace. You are worthy of it. The journey to set boundaries with a narcissist is often filled with moments of uncertainty, and in some ways, the process can feel like walking on a tightrope. You know what you need. You know that you have the right to set boundaries. But there's always that nagging voice in the back of your mind asking, am I doing this right? Am I being too harsh? Am I going to lose this person if I stand my ground? These questions are not just common. They are part of the emotional labor that comes with breaking free from the toxic cycle of narcissistic manipulation. But here's something important to understand. Your worth doesn't depend on the narcissist's approval. It doesn't depend on how they react to your boundaries. And it certainly doesn't depend on whether or not they understand or accept your need to set those boundaries in the first place. We are conditioned in many ways to seek external validation. We seek reassurance from others. We look for approval in our relationships. And often we bend over backwards trying to ensure that the people we care about are happy with us. But with a narcissist, this dynamic is particularly dangerous. Narcissists thrive on control, and one of the most effective ways they maintain that control is by getting us to question ourselves, to feel unsure about our own needs, to second guess our decisions. They know how to make us doubt our worth, and they know how to make us feel guilty for wanting to take up space in a relationship. And when we begin to second guess ourselves, when we start looking for external validation, we give them the power they crave. We give them control over our emotional state and our ability to set healthy boundaries. But here's the truth. No one, not even a narcissist, has the right to dictate how you feel or what you deserve. And your worth is not tied to their approval. Your worth is inherent in who you are. It's not something that needs to be earned, and it certainly doesn't need to be validated by someone who consistently disregards your needs. The first step in this journey of setting boundaries is understanding that you cannot control how the narcissist responds. In fact, you shouldn't even try. The narcissist is going to react in ways that you cannot predict. They may become angry, defensive, or even manipulative. They may try to turn the tables on you and make you feel like you are the one causing the problem. They might try to gaslight you, distort your reality, or even make you feel like your boundaries are unreasonable or selfish. But here's the reality. Their reaction is not your responsibility. How they respond to your boundaries is not a reflection of your worth or your right to stand up for yourself. It is a reflection of their inability or unwillingness to respect you. It can be difficult, especially when you've been conditioned to seek approval or to care about what others think of you. But one of the most liberating things you can do is to accept that you don't need their approval. You don't need them to understand your boundaries. And you certainly don't need them to accept them. What you need is to stand firm in your own truth and in the knowledge that you deserve to have your needs met, regardless of how they respond. Think about it for a moment. When you are constantly seeking approval from a narcissist, you are putting your emotional well-being in their hands. You are giving them the power to dictate your sense of worth. You are allowing their reaction to your needs to determine how you feel about yourself. And when you give them that kind of power, you enter into a cycle of self-doubt, guilt, and emotional turmoil that makes it incredibly difficult to set clear and healthy boundaries. But when you shift your focus from seeking their approval to affirming your own worth, everything changes. You begin to understand that your boundaries are about protecting yourself, not about pleasing someone else. You begin to see that your right to set boundaries is not contingent on how the narcissist responds, but on your inherent right to protect your emotional and mental health. This shift is critical because it allows you to take back control of your emotional state. It allows you to stop relying on external validation and start trusting yourself. So how do you do this? How do you set boundaries without needing the narcissist's approval or validation? It starts with understanding that your worth is not up for debate. It's not something that needs to be negotiated. It's not something that depends on someone else's reaction or approval. Your worth is fixed. It's inherent in who you are. And when you start to truly internalize this, you'll begin to feel more grounded in your own truth. You will stop looking for external validation and start validating yourself. You will trust that your needs are valid, even if the narcissist doesn't understand or respect them. And when you do that, you create a boundary that is unshakable, not because it's perfect, but because it comes from a place of deep self-respect. It also helps to remember that the narcissist's behavior is not personal. Their reaction to your boundaries is not about you. It's about their inability to accept or respect boundaries in the first place. Narcissists are often incapable of understanding that other people have needs and desires that are separate from their own. They operate from a place of self-centeredness, and this makes it difficult for them to empathize with others. When you set a boundary, they may see it as a threat to their sense of control, not as a reasonable request for respect. This is why they may react with anger, guilt, or manipulation. But these reactions are not a reflection of your actions or your worth. They are a reflection of their inability to function in a healthy, respectful way. When you stop seeking their approval, you start to detach from their emotional manipulation. You stop allowing their reactions to dictate how you feel about yourself. Instead, you create space for your own emotions, your own needs, and your own well-being. You stop putting yourself in a position where you feel like you have to explain, defend, or justify your boundaries. You stop relying on the narcissist's response to determine your worth. This doesn't mean that you stop caring about the relationship altogether, but it does mean that you start caring more about your own well-being. You begin to understand that in order to have a healthy relationship with anyone, including a narcissist, you must first have a healthy relationship with yourself. You must learn to trust your own instincts, validate your own feelings, and protect your own needs. And when you do that, you stop feeling like you need the narcissist's approval to feel good about yourself. There's a profound sense of freedom that comes with this realization. You no longer feel like you're walking on eggshells, constantly trying to please someone who will never be satisfied. You no longer feel like you have to explain or justify your decisions. You simply stand firm in your own truth, knowing that your boundaries are not only valid, they are necessary for your own well-being. And when you stop needing the narcissist's approval, you free yourself from their grip. You stop being held hostage by their need for control. You start to take back control of your own life. It's not always easy, and it doesn't always happen overnight, but with each step you become more and more grounded in your own worth. And with each boundary you set, with each time you refuse to engage in the cycle of manipulation and approval seeking, you get closer to the place where you no longer need their validation. You get closer to the place where you can truly say, I am enough, just as I am. I am worthy of respect, of love, and of peace. And when you're dealing with a narcissist, one of the most important things to remember is that setting boundaries isn't a one-time action. It's an ongoing process that requires commitment, consistency, and self-awareness. It can be easy to get frustrated or discouraged when you find yourself constantly repeating the same boundaries or facing resistance from the narcissist over and over again. You might even start to wonder if it's worth it or if it will ever get better. But here's the thing, the power to protect your peace is always in your hands. And the more consistently you reinforce your boundaries, the stronger they become. The key to maintaining boundaries with a narcissist isn't about creating the perfect boundary once and for all. It's about reinforcing them day after day until they become a part of how you protect and honor yourself. You see, the reason that boundaries are so crucial when dealing with a narcissist is because they thrive on manipulation. They will test your limits, push your buttons, and attempt to wear you down. Narcissists are masters at finding weaknesses in others. And when they see that a boundary is flexible or that you are wavering, they will seize on that opportunity to undermine your efforts. If they sense that you're uncertain or not fully committed to the boundary, they'll use their typical tactics, guilt tripping, gaslighting, or outright ignoring what you've said to push through that boundary. And this can leave you feeling exhausted, frustrated, and questioning your own resolve. But here's the thing, boundaries are not meant to be a one-time declaration. They are meant to be an ongoing practice. The more consistent you are, the less power the narcissist has over you. Consistency in enforcing your boundaries is like building a wall. At first, it may feel fragile and easy to break, but over time, as you reinforce it, it becomes stronger, more impenetrable, and harder for anyone, narcissist or not, to breach. This consistency is what gives you the strength to maintain your peace, to honor your needs, and to protect your emotional well-being. It's also important to understand that boundaries are not just about what you say, they are also about what you do. The narcissist may try to convince you that you're being unreasonable, that you're overreacting, or that your boundaries don't make sense. They may question your motives or try to manipulate your feelings, but the power of your boundaries lies not in your words, but in your actions. If you say you need space, you have to follow through and take that space. If you say you need time for yourself, you have to honor that commitment, even if it feels uncomfortable or the narcissist tries to make you feel guilty. One of the things that makes dealing with a narcissist so difficult is that their behavior is often unpredictable. One minute they might seem to respect your boundaries, and the next they're crossing them again. This inconsistency can make it feel like you're constantly in a battle to keep your boundaries in place. And while this can be frustrating, it's also a reminder that your boundaries are working. Yeah, and the narcissist wouldn't be pushing so hard if they didn't feel threatened by them. The fact that they are trying to wear you down means that your boundaries are a threat to their control. When you reinforce your boundaries consistently, you are not just protecting yourself from the narcissist, you are also protecting your relationship with yourself. Too often we let the pressure of others, especially narcissistic individuals, convince us that we should adjust our boundaries, that we should make compromises for the sake of harmony or to avoid conflict. But this only leads to resentment, frustration, and burnout. And more importantly, it leads to a loss of self-respect. The truth is, when you allow your boundaries to be compromised over and over again, you begin to lose sight of your own needs, your own feelings, and your own worth. You begin to believe that your needs don't matter, that you don't deserve to take up space, or that you don't deserve peace. But when you commit to reinforcing your boundaries, you are telling yourself, I am worthy of respect. I am worthy of peace. My needs are valid and I will honor them no matter what anyone else thinks. You are teaching yourself that your worth is not contingent on others' approval and that your boundaries are a reflection of your commitment to yourself. This is a powerful act of self-love. In many ways, reinforcing your boundaries is a practice of building resilience. It's about standing firm in the face of pushback, standing strong in your belief that you deserve respect, and refusing to allow anyone, no matter how manipulative or convincing they are, to undermine your sense of self-worth. It's about recognizing that you can't control the narcissist's behavior, but you can control how you respond to it. And by consistently reinforcing your boundaries, you regain control over your own life and emotional well-being. This process also requires a great deal of self-compassion. It's important to understand that you won't always get it right. There will be moments when you slip, when the narcissist wears you down, when you feel exhausted and just want to give in. And when that happens, it's important to be kind to yourself. Don't beat yourself up for moments of weakness. Instead, recognize that setting boundaries is hard work, especially when dealing with someone who is so adept at manipulating your emotions. The key is to get back on track and continue to reinforce your boundaries no matter how difficult it feels. When you reinforce your boundaries, you also begin to understand the importance of detaching emotionally from the narcissist's behavior. The narcissist will often try to make you feel responsible for their emotions, and they'll attempt to draw you into their drama. But by consistently reinforcing your boundaries, you make it clear that you are not responsible for how they feel. You are not responsible for their reactions, their anger, or their manipulation. Your job is to protect your peace, not to fix their emotional turmoil. The more you detach emotionally from their behavior, the more you create space for yourself to grow, to heal, and to reclaim your power. You begin to see that their actions don't have to define your emotional state. They can push your buttons all they want, but you no longer have to engage in the drama. You can calmly and consistently reinforce your boundaries without being dragged into their emotional chaos. One of the most difficult aspects of reinforcing boundaries with a narcissist is the emotional toll it takes. Narcissists are incredibly draining, and their constant manipulation and demands can leave you feeling depleted and unsure of yourself. It's easy to get caught up in their web of manipulation, to fall into the trap of trying to meet their endless needs, or to doubt your ability to set and maintain boundaries. But this is where it's crucial to recognize that reinforcing your boundaries isn't just about the narcissist. It's about you. It's about protecting your own energy, your own peace, and your own sense of self-worth. When you reinforce your boundaries, you make a powerful statement to yourself: I am worth protecting. My needs matter. My peace matters. And the more you reinforce that message to yourself, the more you begin to feel grounded in your own worth. You stop questioning whether you're being too harsh or too demanding or too selfish. You start to realize that your boundaries are not only necessary for your well-being, they are a reflection of your self-respect. This is why consistency is so important. It's not about being perfect or always getting it right. It's about the ongoing commitment to honoring your needs, to protecting your peace, and to standing firm in your belief that you deserve respect. Each time you reinforce your boundaries, you become stronger, more resilient, and more empowered. You want to teach yourself that you are worthy of love and respect, not because you give endlessly, but because you honor yourself. To own your hymns entirely, do you also keep your promises to yourself, aka the meaning. Because you are navigating this journey of setting and reinforcing boundaries with a narcissist, remember that you are in control. You are the one who decides how much space you are willing to give, how much you are willing to tolerate. Your boundaries are not about controlling the narcissist. They are about protecting your peace, your well-being, and your emotional health. And as you continue to reinforce them day after day, you will see that you are becoming more confident, more self-assured, and more at peace with yourself. Your boundaries are not walls to keep others out. They are gates that protect your inner peace. And the more consistently you reinforce them, the stronger they become, the more empowered you feel, and the closer you come to the person you were always meant to be. You have the power to protect yourself. You have the strength to maintain your boundaries, and you are worthy of the peace that comes with doing so.